President Obama is hosting more than 50 world leaders in Washington for his fourth and final nuclear security summit. The two-day event began on Thursday. Leaders discussed how to secure nuclear materials around the world to keep it out of the hands of terrorists. The president addressed this in a meeting with President of France, Francois Hollande.
Dear friend and partner in so many issues, President Hollande of France and his delegation. This is obviously an occasion in which we are deeply concerned about nuclear security, making sure that nuclear materials don't fall into the hands of terrorists, but in the wake of the Brussels attack, with our memories of the tragedy in Paris, we have not only great urgency around the nuclear issue, but eliminating generally the scourge of terrorism.
And CBS News Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan is at the White House tonight. Margaret, you heard the president there talking about Brussels and terrorists and nuclear weapons, terrible combination. How focused is the summit on that?
Well, the threat of nuclear terrorism is really overshadowing this entire conference. This was supposed to be simply about securing nuclear materials and cutting back on stockpiles, more the sort of traditional weapons control that you and I think of. But in the wake of the Brussels attack just a week ago, and with that video evidence showing that the two suicide bombers appeared to be tracking and surveilling a top nuclear scientist in Belgium, that has skyrocketed fears and immediate concerns that ISIS is looking to experiment possibly with nuclear materials. We know that they have already used chemical weapons in Syria, and now the fear is among U.S. intelligence that ISIS may be trying to experiment with another type of weapon of mass destruction. And you're going to tomorrow see a number of these world leaders meet with President Obama, and he's going to speak about what the plan is here. They're actually going to simulate what it would look like if a radiological device like a dirty bomb exploded in a major urban center. So this is being dealt with as a very immediate concern.
Well, it's one thing, of course, to react to a dirty bomb or a nuclear bomb from terrorists, quite another to prevent it. You've got to wonder what creative ideas are coming along those lines. Have we heard anything to that effect?
Well, the UN says that they already have about 2,500, reports that they know of unauthorized trade or theft of nuclear material. That's what we know about. The U.S. is worried that there are actually more loose nukes out there. And we're not just talking about nuclear weapons in the Cold War sense. You're talking about radiological or atomic material that's used in hospitals, that's used in universities for research, and in some countries is used for energy. And that's why the U.S. is asking many of these countries to take stock of what they have, track it, put more security at borders and at airports and at ports to try to clamp down on what's out there. So this is about prevention, but it's also trying to get a hold and nail down the nuclear material that is already circulating.
Understood. Now, North Korea's nuclear power, that's been of major focus, not just this year, but in many years past. What are we hearing about that, Margaret?
Well, this was the focus of a big summit today with the leader of South Korea, President Park, and the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, who sat down in a trilateral session here to say, look, you are allies here with the United States. How are you going to help protect us from what North Korea is threatening to do? This rhetoric has gotten really heated in recent weeks. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, forging ahead with his nuclear weapons development. And this is despite being the most heavily sanctioned country in the world. And the U.S. and UN have slapped on more sanctions in the past few months. So they're really trying to figure out new ways to put pressure on Kim Jong-un. And today, President Obama had a pretty intense meeting with China's President Xi Jinping to say, listen, what you're doing isn't working. You need to put more pressure on your client in Pyongyang to stop experimenting and stop trying to grow this nuclear weapons program.
Margaret, a glaring absence is Russia not being there. How much can be accomplished without them at the table?
Well, that's a big hindrance to anything President Obama wants to announce here, because Russia, as a former, part of the former Soviet Union, has about half of the world's stockpile of nuclear material. So knowing what they have and how secure it is a big part of this equation. Vladimir Putin is boycotting the summit because of tensions with the United States, has refused to show up. The White House has sort of downplayed that, saying, look, Russia actually was helpful when it came to negotiating a nuclear accord with Iran. We actually do agree on these issues. It doesn't matter that Putin showed up. It's his loss. But it actually is a really important element to eliminating the threat, particularly because of the rising threat of Islamic extremism in Russia itself. A number of the fighters on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria are coming from Russian-influenced areas, from Chechnya, from elsewhere, and there's fear that those fighters could go back to Moscow. So what the White House is emphasizing here is loose nuclear material anywhere in the world is a threat to the rest of us because it can be spread around. So the other glaring absence, I should point out, Maurice, is also Iran's not here.
Yes.
And, you know, the U.S. and Iran still have a lot of tensions between them, but this White House is very proud of the nuclear deal it forged with Iran. And so it was interesting that they decided not to bring Iran to the table. They're just not ready to go there yet.
Very interesting, in fact, Margaret. Also, one final thought here. Nuclear proliferation, we've heard the president talk about that for a number of years. That's a major goal of his. But when he leaves office, things are probably going to change. He's working, I imagine, to ensure that things keep moving in that direction, isn't he?
You're right. I mean, just in the past few hours, you've seen a flurry of announcements from the White House about all these different agreements that the U.S. has forged with countries like the United Kingdom, a lot of friendly countries, with China as well, a huge economic powerhouse, to try to clamp down and reduce nuclear material. The UK, for instance, is going to ship a lot of their highly enriched uranium, which is basically nuclear fuel, here to the U.S., and we're going to turn it into isotopes for use in medical purposes, in the fight against cancer. So they're trying to find these really innovative ways to reduce the amount of nuclear material out there. Those are some of the projects that President Obama sees as very key to his legacy as a peacemaker. Nuclear security was an issue he really pushed coming into office in 2009. That was before the rise of ISIS. So now nuclear terrorism is overshadowing the rest of his agenda. And so the White House is really trying to grab hold of that. And when you hear from the President Obama tomorrow, he's going to emphasize that the progress he's made, but clearly there are a plethora of new threats out there.
Clearly. Much more to come on this on Friday. Margaret Brennan at the White House. Thank you.